A mother's promise. The nursery had become Daisy's sanctuary. Whenever the stress became too much, whenever Richard called, whenever Vanessa found new ways to irritate her, whenever fear crept into her heart, she came here. The room was finally complete. 3 cribs stood side by side. 3 blankets rested neatly inside. 3 stuffed animals occupied a nearby shelf. Everything was ready. Everything except the babies. Daisy slowly lowered herself into the rocking chair. At 8 months pregnant, even sitting had become a challenge. The triplets had apparently decided her ribs were excellent playground equipment. She winced as one of them kicked. Ow. Another kick followed. Then another. Daisy narrowed her eyes. I know that's all 3 of you. The movement continued. She sighed dramatically. You know, normal people only carry 1 baby. The babies ignored her. Or perhaps they simply didn't care. Either way, the assault continued. A smile spread across her face. For the first time in years, she felt complete. Not because life was perfect. Far from it. But because she finally had something worth fighting for. 3 somethings, actually. Later that afternoon, Sophia arrived carrying lunch. And gossip. Mostly gossip. Daisy. The tone immediately made Daisy suspicious. What? Sophia sat down. I saw Vanessa. Daisy groaned. I'm already tired. You should be. That's not encouraging. It gets worse. Wonderful. Daisy leaned back carefully. What did she want? Sophia rolled her eyes. To pretend she's excited about becoming a grandmother. Daisy laughed. A genuine laugh. Vanessa excited. That was the funniest thing she'd heard all week. The woman looked physically ill every time the triplets were mentioned. Especially since Daisy's lawyers had recently confirmed something important. The inheritance clause would activate immediately after the children were born. Not months later. Not years later. Immediately. Which meant Richard's time was running out. And everyone knew it. Across town, Richard Hart was having the worst month of his life. Every new legal update felt like another nail in the coffin. Every conversation with lawyers ended badly. Every attempt to delay Daisy's inheritance had failed. He sat behind his desk staring at the city. Furious. Powerless. Cornered. A combination he hated. Vanessa entered without knocking. They finalized the documents. Richard didn't look up. I know. The transfer process is ready. I know. Vanessa hesitated. For once, she seemed nervous. What are we going to do? Richard's jaw tightened. The answer should have been simple. Accept defeat. Move on. Prepare for the transition. Instead, another answer kept surfacing. A darker answer. One he refused to speak aloud. Yet. His gaze drifted toward a framed photograph on his desk. Daisy. Taken years ago. Before everything fell apart. Before greed had poisoned their relationship. For a brief moment, guilt surfaced. Then disappeared. Because greed always won. That same evening, Martha and George arrived at a small cafe. Her hands trembled as she stepped inside. The investigative journalist sat waiting. A woman in her 40s. Sharp. Intelligent. Respected. Most importantly. Difficult to intimidate. You look terrified. Martha laughed nervously. I probably should be. The journalist frowned. That serious? Martha slid a folder across the table. The woman opened it. Her expression slowly changed. Page after page. Record after record. Evidence after evidence. The journalist eventually looked up. My God. Martha nodded. Exactly. My God. Because that's how she had reacted too. This goes beyond a clinic mistake. It does. The journalist leaned back. Thoughtful. Concerned. Interested. Very interested. Do you know who might be involved? Martha hesitated. Then answered honestly. No, the journalist closed the folder. But someone certainly does. Neither woman noticed the men sitting near the window. Watching. Listening. Reporting. Near midnight, Daisy awoke suddenly. A strange sensation spread through her body. For a moment she remained still. Confused. Disoriented. Then it happened again. A sharp tightening. Followed by pain. Her eyes widened. No, the word escaped automatically. The doctor had said there was still time. Several weeks. At least. Another contraction hit. Stronger. Longer. Fear flooded her chest. She grabbed the bedside lamp. The clock glowed back at her. 12:47 a.m. Another pain followed. And this time there was no denying it. Daisy's heart began pounding. Oh no. The babies weren't supposed to arrive yet. Not yet. Not now. Not this early. She reached for her phone. Her hands shaking. Then froze. Because a warm sensation suddenly spread beneath her. Her water had broken. For one terrifying second, the world stopped. Then panic exploded. DMN it. Somewhere inside her, 3 tiny lives had decided they were done waiting. And nothing would ever be the same again. 3 miracles. Move. The hospital corridor became a blur. Doctors. Nurses. Wheelchairs. Machines. Everything moved too fast. Too loud. Too suddenly. Daisy gripped the side of the hospital bed as another contraction ripped through her body. A scream escaped her lips. The pain was unbearable. Far worse than she had imagined. Far worse than anyone had warned her. Ms. Hart, stay with us. A nurse squeezed her hand. We're almost there. Almost. The word meant nothing. The only thing Daisy could think about was her babies. Please be okay. Please be okay. Please be okay. The prayer repeated endlessly in her mind. Outside the delivery room, Sophia paced nervously. Her hands shook. Her heart refused to slow down. The doctors had made it very clear. Triplets. Premature delivery. High-risk pregnancy. Complications were possible. Danger was possible. Fear was unavoidable. Sophia hated every second of it. The doors remained closed. No updates. No information. Nothing. All she could do was wait. And pray. Inside the delivery room, chaos reigned. Blood pressure. Monitor the babies. We're losing time. Prepare the neonatal team. Voices echoed everywhere. Daisy could barely process them. Another contraction hit. She cried out. Tears streamed down her face. Her body felt like it was breaking apart. The doctor moved beside her. Daisy. She looked up. You need to focus. Focus. How? Everything hurt. Everything terrified her. The doctor squeezed her shoulder. Your babies need you. The words cut through the panic. Immediately. The babies. Daniel. Diana. Damien. Her children. The reason she had fought. The reason she had endured. The reason she refused to give up. Daisy nodded. Then pushed. Across the city, Anthony Green couldn't sleep. Again. The penthouse felt suffocating. The silence felt worse than usual. For some reason, a strange restlessness had settled over him. Anxiety. Unease. Expectation. He couldn't explain it. Nor could he ignore it. At 2 o'clock in the morning he found himself standing beside the windows. Watching the city lights. Waiting for something. Though he had no idea what. The feeling made no sense. Yet it persisted. As though fate itself was holding its breath. Back at the hospital, the first cry shattered the air. A tiny cry. Weak. Fragile. Beautiful. Daisy immediately burst into tears. Oh my God. The doctor smiled. It's a boy. Relief flooded through her. Her baby. Her son. One of her miracles. The nurses quickly carried him away for evaluation. Before Daisy could fully process what had happened, another contraction struck. Another push. Another scream. Another cry. This one stronger. Louder. A little fighter. It's a girl. Fresh tears filled Daisy's eyes. Her daughter. Perfect. Beautiful. Alive. The room became blurry. Emotion overwhelmed her. Yet there was still one baby left. One final miracle. One final battle. The smallest of the three. The one who had worried the doctors most. The one they feared might struggle. Daisy's heart pounded. Come on, baby. Another push. Another wave of pain. Then silence. Terrible silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody smiled. Nobody moved. Fear exploded inside her. No, the word escaped instantly. No, the room remained tense. Too tense. Daisy's breathing became frantic. What happened? Nobody answered. What's wrong? Then suddenly, a cry. Loud. Angry. Determined. The loudest cry of all. The entire room exhaled at once. Several nurses laughed. One even wiped away tears. The doctor smiled. There's your third miracle. Daisy completely broke down. Relief. Joy. Love. Gratitude. Everything hit at once. Her children were alive. All three. Against the odds. Against the risks. Against the fear. They were here. Hours later, the world finally became quiet. The emergency was over. The danger had passed. The babies rested safely inside the neonatal unit. Small. Fragile. Perfect. Daisy sat in a wheelchair staring through the glass. Unable to look away. 3 tiny incubators. 3 tiny humans. 3 tiny futures. The nurse stood beside her. Have you chosen names? Daisy smiled through exhausted tears. She already knew. She had known for months. Her gaze moved to the first baby. Daniel. Then the second. Diana. And finally the third. The troublemaker. The fighter. The loud one. Damien. The nurse smiled. Beautiful names. Daisy nodded. Because they were. Not just names. Promises. Dreams. Futures. Her family. For several moments she simply stared at them. Memorizing every detail. Every tiny finger. Every tiny face. Every tiny breath. Then she whispered the words she had dreamed of saying for months. Hello, my babies. 3 tiny lives slept peacefully. Completely unaware that they had just changed the world. Completely unaware that somewhere in the city, a man named Anthony Green was unknowingly awake at the exact moment they were born. Completely unaware that the blood flowing through their veins carried a secret powerful enough to destroy families, empires, and lies that had survived for 15 years. And thus, Daniel Hart, Diana Hart, and Damien Hart entered the world. The greatest chapter of the story had just begun. 5 years later. Damien Hart. The entire house fell silent. For approximately 3 seconds. Then running footsteps echoed through the hallway. Fast footsteps. Guilty footsteps. Daisy closed her eyes. The fact that she could now identify which child was running simply by the sound of their footsteps probably said something about her parenting. Or her exhaustion. Possibly both. 5 years. 5 wonderful, chaotic, exhausting, beautiful years. And somehow Damien still found new ways to test her sanity. Get back here. A burst of laughter echoed through the mansion, followed by a small figure sprinting around the corner. Damien Hart. Age 5. Professional troublemaker. Part-time angel. Full-time menace. The boy skidded to a stop. His dark eyes widened innocently. Far too innocently. Yes, Mommy. Daisy narrowed her eyes. Why is there paint on the dog? Damien immediately looked offended. Asking difficult questions isn't nice. Daisy stared at him. The boy actually had the nerve to look disappointed in her. The dog wandered into the room. Bright blue. Entirely blue. From head to tail. Daisy slowly looked back at her son. Explain. Damien considered this carefully. Then pointed. It was an artistic disagreement. At the dining table, Daniel Hart sighed. The sigh of a child who had somehow become mentally 40 years old despite only being 5. His dark hair fell neatly across his forehead. Unlike his brother, Daniel preferred rules. Order. Logic. Sanity. 3 things Damien openly declared war against. Mom. Daniel looked up from his book. Yes. Why is your brother blue? Daniel didn't even look surprised. He painted the dog. Daisy blinked. How did you know? Daniel finally looked up. Experience. Fair point. Across from him, Diana Hart dissolved into giggles. The little girl nearly fell out of her chair laughing. Unlike her brothers, Diana seemed determined to love everyone. People. Animals. Plants. Random strangers. If it breathed, Diana probably wanted to hug it. Which made her the sweetest member of the family. And occasionally the most dangerous. Especially when she attempted to hug unfamiliar dogs. Or bees. Or geese. The memories still traumatized Daisy. 5 years. 5 incredible years. And despite all the challenges, Daisy wouldn't change a thing. Not one moment. Not one sleepless night. Not one tantrum. Not one disaster. Not even the blue dog. Okay. Maybe the blue dog. But everything else? Never. Because these children were her entire world. After breakfast, Daisy loaded the triplets into the car. School. A word that somehow arrived much faster than she expected. 1 minute they had been tiny babies. The next they were asking complicated questions and forming opinions. Life was unfair. And suspiciously fast. The drive remained peaceful. For exactly 6 minutes. Then Damien spoke. Mom. Daisy immediately became suspicious. Children never started conversations that way unless trouble was coming. Yes. Can I get a pet crocodile? No, but, no, you're not even listening. I don't need to. Damien sighed dramatically. His suffering was apparently immense. A few minutes later they arrived at school. The children immediately climbed out. Daniel adjusted his backpack. Diana hugged Daisy. Damien attempted to negotiate for the crocodile again. Normal morning. Almost. Then something happened. Something small. Yet significant. A little boy nearby ran toward his father. Daddy. The men lifted him effortlessly. The child laughed. The father smiled. The moment lasted only seconds. But Daisy noticed. Because Diana noticed. The little girl watched quietly. Thoughtfully. Curiously. Then she looked up. Mommy. Daisy's heart immediately sank. She knew that tone. She knew that question. And she had spent 5 years dreading it. Yes, sweetheart. Diana hesitated. Then asked softly, why don't we have a daddy? The world seemed to stop. Daniel looked up. Damien stopped talking about crocodiles. Even the morning traffic seemed quieter. For a moment, Daisy couldn't breathe. Because she had always known this day would come. She just wasn't ready for it. Not yet. Not when their eyes were looking at her with such innocent curiosity. Not when she didn't have answers herself. Not when the truth was more complicated than any 5-year-old could understand. Diana waited patiently. The boys waited too. 3 small faces. 3 precious hearts. 3 children who deserved the truth. Or at least part of it. Daisy knelt beside them and gently brushed Diana's hair behind her ear. Her voice came out softer than intended. You do have a daddy. 3 pairs of eyes widened immediately. Really? Damien sounded personally betrayed. Daisy almost laughed. Yes. Where is he? Daniel asked. The question hurt because she genuinely didn't know. She never had. She swallowed, carefully choosing her words. Sometimes life is complicated. The triplets exchanged confused looks. Clearly unsatisfied. Unfortunately, so was Daisy. Because for the first time in 5 years, she realized something. Eventually, they would want more than vague answers. Eventually, they would want the truth. And she wasn't sure how to give it to them. Especially when she didn't know it herself. Far across the city, Anthony Green stepped out of his car in front of Green Holdings headquarters. $30 billion. Thousands of employees. An empire at his fingertips. Yet somehow, his life remained just as empty as it had been 5 years earlier. And neither he nor Daisy knew it. But fate had finally begun moving them toward each other. The countdown had started. The question that wouldn't go away. The question followed Daisy home. It followed her through lunch, through work, through the afternoon, through dinner, and by bedtime, it was still sitting heavily inside her chest. Why don't we have a daddy? Children had a way of asking questions adults spent years avoiding. Questions that seemed simple but weren't. Questions that hurt. Daisy stood in the kitchen staring out the window. The city lights glittered beyond the glass. Beautiful. Distant. Cold. For 5 years she had managed to avoid this conversation. Now she knew it was only the beginning. The triplets were growing up. Soon they would want answers. Real answers. And she wasn't sure she had them. Mommy. Daisy turned. Diana stood in the doorway holding a stuffed rabbit. The little girl looked sleepy. Her pink pajamas were slightly crooked. One sock was missing. As usual. Daisy smiled. What are you doing awake? Diana climbed onto a stool. I can't sleep. Bad dream. The little girl shook her head. Then her expression became thoughtful. Daddy. Daisy nearly choked on air. Of course. The topic again. Diana rested her chin on the counter. Do you know him? The question hurt more than the first one. Because the honest answer was no. Not at all. Daisy didn't know his name, his face, his voice. Nothing. The man was a complete stranger. A ghost. A blank space. Yet somehow he was also the father of her children. The contradiction was exhausting. Daisy carefully lifted Diana into her lap. Sweetheart, she paused, searching for words. Any words. The right words. Unfortunately, parenting didn't come with instruction manuals. We don't always get answers immediately. Diana frowned. That clearly wasn't good enough. But will we meet him? The question struck straight through Daisy's heart because she genuinely didn't know. Maybe. Maybe not. The donor records were anonymous. The clinic had made that very clear. She kissed Diana's forehead. One day, if it's meant to happen. The little girl considered this and finally nodded, satisfied for now. Only for now. Because Daisy knew the questions would return again and again until eventually they demanded more than vague explanations. The following morning, Green Holdings hosted one of the largest business conferences in the city. Hundreds of executives filled the ballroom. Investors. Politicians. Business leaders. Everyone wanted access to Anthony Green. Everyone wanted a meeting. Everyone wanted something. Anthony hated days like this. Not because of the work. Because of the people. Most conversations felt fake. Most smiles felt calculated. Most relationships felt transactional. Yet he endured them because it was expected, because responsibility came with the empire, because he didn't have much else. A young executive approached nervously. Mr. Green. Anthony looked up. Yes. The men handed him a tablet. These are the sponsorship requests for local schools. Anthony scanned the list. Normally he would have delegated it. Today something caught his attention. A photograph. A group of smiling children standing outside a small academy. Anthony stared briefly, then moved on, completely unaware that among the dozens of schools listed, one belonged to the 3 children who shared his blood. Meanwhile, Damien Hart was in trouble. Again. Which wasn't surprising. The surprising part was that it had taken until lunchtime. Daisy sat inside the principal's office trying very hard not to laugh. Very hard. The principal looked exhausted. Mrs. Hart. Daisy nodded. The woman pointed toward Damien. Would you like to explain? Damien crossed his arms. No, the principal looked horrified. Daisy looked suspicious. What happened? The principal sighed. He organized a business venture. Daisy blinked. A what? The principal handed over a notebook. Several pages contained drawings, numbers, prices, calculations, contracts. Actual contracts. Daisy stared, confused. Damien. Her son brightened immediately. Finally someone was speaking his language. I was selling playground passes. The room fell silent. You were doing what? Damien smiled proudly. The swings are popular. The principal looked ready to retire. So you charged other children money? Damien nodded. Supply and demand. Daisy closed her eyes. Daniel. This sounded like Daniel. Not Damien. Where did you learn that phrase? Damien pointed at his brother. Of course. Of course he did. The principal slid another document forward. He made $300. The room exploded. What? Even Daisy was shocked. $300? At 5 years old. Damien looked pleased. The principal did not. Mrs. Hart. The woman's voice became serious. Your son has accidentally started a black market economy. Daisy immediately lost the battle. Laughter burst out. Uncontrollable. Complete. Utter. Failure. The principal stared. Damien grinned. And somewhere across the city, Anthony Green sat in a boardroom discussing billion-dollar acquisitions. Neither knew it, but one day they would discover something extraordinary. The same business instincts. The same stubbornness. The same relentless determination. Had somehow appeared in both father and son. And when that day came, nothing would ever be the same. Like looking in a mirror. Anthony Green hated charity events. Unfortunately, his grandfather loved them. Which was why he found himself standing inside a crowded children's education fundraiser on a Saturday morning. Children ran everywhere. Parents mingled. Teachers chatted excitedly. The noise alone was enough to make him reconsider every decision that had led him here. You look thrilled. Anthony glanced at his grandfather. The old man looked far too amused. I am. Liar. Anthony smiled despite himself. The older man chuckled. One day you'll thank me. Doubtful. For some reason, his grandfather kept exposing him to situations involving children, as if he believed Anthony's life would somehow improve through proximity. Anthony wasn't convinced. Across the venue, Daisy was experiencing her own form of chaos. Damien. The little boy immediately disappeared behind a display table. A clear sign of guilt. Get back here. No, several nearby parents laughed. Daisy was not amused. Daniel sighed. Again. A skill he had perfected despite being only 5 years old. I told him not to do it. Daisy narrowed her eyes. Do what? Daniel pointed toward the stage, specifically toward the donation box. A donation box Damien had apparently transformed into an investment opportunity. Daisy closed her eyes. Of course he had. Explain. Damien smiled. A dangerous sign. I improved the system. No, yes. No, the boy pointed proudly toward a handwritten sign. Double your donation. Daisy blinked. Then blinked again. What does that even mean? I don't know. Silence. You don't know. No, then why did you write it? Damien looked genuinely confused. As marketing. Several parents burst into laughter. Daniel covered his face. Diana giggled. Daisy questioned every life choice she'd ever made. At that exact moment, Anthony happened to look in their direction. And froze. Not because of Daisy. Not because of Diana. Not even because of Daniel. Because of Damien. The little boy stood on a chair arguing passionately with three adults. Completely fearless. Completely confident. Completely ridiculous. Anthony found himself watching. Amused. Against his will. Something about the child felt strangely familiar. The mannerisms. The stubbornness. The confidence. The refusal to admit defeat. The little boy reminded him of someone. He just couldn't figure out who. Meanwhile, Damien had spotted Anthony. The very tall man in the expensive suit. The man who looked important. And therefore, potentially profitable. Dangerous thought. Very dangerous thought. Before anyone could stop him, Damien marched across the room straight toward Anthony. Daisy turned around just in time to see it happening. Oh no. Daniel immediately understood. Oh no. Diana joined them. Oh no. The triplets had apparently reached unanimous agreement. This could only end badly. Anthony was speaking with a sponsor when a tiny voice interrupted. Excuse me. The executives immediately fell silent. Anthony looked down. A small boy stood in front of him. Hands behind his back. Expression serious. Anthony raised an eyebrow. Yes. Damien pointed toward the donation booth. Would you like to invest in childhood? The silence that followed was magnificent. The executives stared. Anthony stared. Damien remained completely serious. Anthony fought a smile. Lost. What? The boy sighed dramatically, clearly surrounded by incompetence. Books. Anthony laughed. Actually laughed. A rare event. Books. Yes. Damien nodded firmly. Children need books. One executive whispered, he's good. Anthony agreed. The boy was very good. A tiny con artist. Or future entrepreneur. Possibly both. What's your name? Damien Hart. Anthony extended a hand. Nice to meet you, Damien Hart. The little boy shook it immediately. Confidently. As though negotiating million-dollar deals was completely normal. Something tugged unexpectedly inside Anthony's chest. A strange feeling. Warm. Unfamiliar. Almost, pride. The emotion startled him because it made absolutely no sense. This wasn't his child. Just a random boy. A very strange random boy. Yet for some reason, Anthony couldn't stop smiling. Across the room, Daisy finally arrived. Mortified. Damien. The little boy turned. Mom. Anthony looked up. And for the first time, really saw her. Beautiful. Elegant. Tired. The expression of a woman raising 3 energetic children. Daisy immediately apologized. I'm so sorry. Anthony glanced between her and Damien. Then smiled. Don't be. Her surprise was obvious. Most people weren't charmed by Damien's schemes. Anthony was. For some reason. Very much so. Daniel and Diana joined them moments later. The siblings immediately surrounded Daisy. Protective. Comfortable. Happy. A family. Anthony felt that strange ache again. The familiar reminder of everything he lacked. Yet he couldn't look away. Not from the children. Not from the woman. Not from the life they represented. A life he had once dreamed of. A life he believed impossible. Eventually Daisy gathered the triplets and headed toward the exit. The children waved goodbye. Even Damien. Especially Damien. Anthony watched them leave long after they disappeared. His grandfather noticed immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. The old man smiled quietly because for the first time in years, Anthony Green had looked genuinely happy around children. And neither of them realized it, but fate had just arranged the first meeting between a father and his son. Neither recognized the other. Yet something had stirred. Something impossible to ignore. And somewhere deep inside Anthony Green, a door he thought was permanently closed had begun to open. The man in the photograph. Anthony couldn't stop thinking about the little boy. It was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Yet 3 days later, Damien Hart still occupied an annoying amount of space inside his head. The child had somehow managed to walk into a charity event, pitch an investment opportunity, and leave with several $1,000s in donations. At 5 years old. Anthony should have forgotten about him immediately. Instead, he found himself smiling whenever he remembered the conversation. Which was deeply concerning. "You're smiling." Anthony looked up. His assistant stood in the doorway. Concerned. Suspicious. Possibly frightened. Anthony immediately stopped smiling. "I wasn't." "You were." "No, you definitely were." Anthony glared. The assistant wisely changed subjects. "Your grandfather wants to see you." Of course he did. The old man had developed an irritating habit of appearing whenever Anthony experienced a rare moment of happiness, as though he somehow sensed it. An hour later, Anthony arrived at Green Manor. The old estate had belonged to the family for generations. Most people found it impressive. Anthony found it exhausting. Too many memories. Too many expectations. Too many ghosts. His grandfather sat inside the library, a room filled with books, history, and family secrets. "Sit." Again. Not a request. Anthony obeyed. Mostly because resistance was pointless. The old man studied him carefully. Too carefully. "You like that little boy?" Anthony sighed. Already. The interrogation had begun. He was amusing. Anthony hated that sound. His grandfather only made it when he didn't believe him. He was. "You looked at him the way your father used to look at you." Anthony froze. The comment landed harder than expected. His father had died years ago. Yet some wounds never completely healed. The old man noticed immediately. His expression softened. "Sorry." Anthony looked away. "It's fine." Neither spoke for several moments. Then his grandfather stood, slowly crossing the room toward an old cabinet. He opened a drawer, pulled out a photograph, and handed it over. Anthony frowned. "What is this?" "A reminder." Anthony looked down. The photograph showed a much younger version of himself, maybe 7 years old, standing beside his father. Both smiling. Both holding fishing rods. A perfect memory frozen in time. For a moment Anthony couldn't breathe. His father had looked so proud. So happy. So alive. The ache returned immediately. The familiar one. The one that appeared whenever he thought about family. About children. About everything he believed he'd never have. "You loved him." Anthony nodded. "I know." "And he loved you." The old man's voice became quiet. "He would have been proud of the men you've become." Anthony stared at the photograph, not trusting himself to speak. Because deep down, the approval he wanted most had belonged to people who were no longer here. His father. His grandmother. The people who had believed in him before life became complicated. Before the diagnoses. Before the loneliness. Before everything. Meanwhile, Daisy was cleaning. A mistake. A terrible mistake. Because cleaning with triplets around was like brushing your teeth while eating cookies. Pointless. Damien. No response. Damien. Still nothing. Very suspicious. The silence alone told her something was wrong. Children were supposed to make noise. Especially Damien. When Damien became quiet, disasters happened. Daisy immediately abandoned her cleaning. Daniel. The little boy looked up from his book. He went upstairs. Alone. Daniel nodded. Another bad sign. Daisy headed upstairs. Fast. Very fast. She found him inside her bedroom standing beside an old storage box. The same box she rarely opened. Her stomach tightened. Damien. The little boy jumped. Caught. Red-handed. Hi, Mom. Daisy looked at the contents scattered across the floor. Old photographs. Medical paperwork. Hospital documents. Records. Memories. Things she had carefully hidden away. What are you doing? Damien looked guilty. For about 2 seconds. Then curiosity took over. Who's this? He held up a photograph. Daisy froze because she immediately recognized it. The photograph had come from the fertility clinic years ago. A generic promotional brochure. One of dozens she had kept during the IVF process. The image showed a smiling man holding a newborn baby. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. Yet Damien stared at it intensely. He looks nice. Daisy swallowed. He's just a model. The little boy nodded. Then asked the question she had been dreading for years. Do you have a picture of our daddy? The room suddenly felt too small. Too quiet. Too heavy. Daisy slowly sat beside him. Her heart breaking all over again. Because the truth remained exactly the same. No. She didn't. She didn't know his face. His voice. His smile. Nothing. The man existed only as a medical file. A donor number. A mystery. And one day her children would want more. Much more. I don't. Damien looked disappointed. The sight hurt. A lot. Will we ever meet him? The question lingered, hanging between them. Painful. Complicated. Unanswered. Daisy pulled him into her lap, holding him tightly. Perhaps more tightly than necessary. I don't know. For once, the usually energetic boy remained quiet. Thoughtful. And for the first time, Daisy truly realized something. Her children weren't babies anymore. Soon they would start searching for answers. And she wasn't sure she could stop them. Far across the city, Anthony Green stood beside a window. The old photograph still rested in his hand. His father smiling beside him. A memory from another life. Another time. A different future. One he had thought was lost forever. On a Father's Day. Daisy should have known something was wrong the moment Daniel became unusually quiet. Her eldest son was many things. Intelligent. Responsible. Observant. But he wasn't quiet. Not like this. The realization hit her while they were eating breakfast. Daniel barely touched his pancakes. Diana looked distracted. Even Damien wasn't talking much. Which was downright terrifying. Because Damien always talked. Always. Okay. Daisy folded her arms. What's going on? 3 pairs of eyes immediately looked away. Suspicious. Very suspicious. Daniel. The little boy sighed. A very adult sigh. One that reminded Daisy far too much of a certain businessman she hadn't met yet. Nothing. Lie. Damien. Her youngest son looked offended. I would never lie. The statement was so ridiculous that even Diana laughed. Daisy narrowed her eyes. What's happening? Silence. Then Diana finally spoke. We have Father's Day at school tomorrow. The words hit Daisy like a truck. Oh. Oh no. Not this. Anything but this. The children looked down, suddenly fascinated by their breakfast. Her heart broke because now she understood. The questions. The strange mood. The sadness. It wasn't really about Father's Day. It was about what they didn't have. Or what they believed they didn't have. Later that afternoon, Daisy met with their teacher. Mrs. Parker looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry." Daisy smiled politely. "It's fine." It wasn't. The teacher shifted nervously. "Normally we celebrate fathers and father figures." Daisy nodded. She understood. The school wasn't trying to hurt anyone. The problem was that life wasn't always simple. Some children had single parents. Some had guardians. Some had grandparents. And some had unanswered questions. Daniel asked if he could skip the event. The statement hurt. A lot. Because Daniel never asked to skip school. Ever. Did he? Mrs. Parker nodded. He said he wasn't feeling well. Daisy closed her eyes briefly. Poor baby. That evening she found Daniel sitting in the garden. Alone. Reading. At least pretending to read. The book hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Daisy sat beside him. For several moments neither spoke. Then she asked quietly, "Want to tell me what's wrong?" Daniel looked down. The little boy's voice came out small. Painfully small. "Everyone else has a dad." There it was. The truth. Raw. Simple. Devastating. Daisy's chest tightened. She pulled him closer. Immediately. Without hesitation. Daniel didn't resist. Instead he leaned into her side. A little boy trying very hard to be brave. Some families are different. Daniel nodded. I know. But his eyes said something else. Something far more painful. Different wasn't what he wanted. He wanted normal. He wanted answers. He wanted what other children had. And Daisy couldn't blame him. Not even a little. Across the city, Anthony Green sat alone in a restaurant. Again. The waitress approached, smiling politely. Table for one. The question stung more than it should have. Always one. Always alone. Anthony forced a smile. Yes. The restaurant was crowded. Families filled nearly every table. Parents. Children. Grandparents. Life. Meanwhile he sat by himself. Like always. A little girl at a nearby table suddenly pointed at him. Daddy. Her father looked up. The girl whispered something. The man laughed. Then smiled at Anthony. Anthony nodded politely. The little girl waved. Anthony waved back. Something unexpected happened. The child smiled. A huge smile. Bright. Innocent. Happy. For a moment, warmth spread through his chest. Then it disappeared, leaving behind the familiar emptiness. The waitress returned. Are you waiting for someone? Anthony glanced around the restaurant. The families. The laughter. The conversations. Then he quietly answered, no. The single word felt heavier than it should have. The following day, the school gymnasium buzzed with excitement. Children ran everywhere. Decorations covered the walls. Colorful signs hung from the ceiling. The atmosphere should have been cheerful. Instead, Daniel sat quietly in a corner. Watching. Waiting. Hurting. Diana sat beside him, trying to be supportive. Damien paced, annoyed, mostly because he disliked being sad. And today everyone seemed sad. Maybe Mommy can come, Diana offered. Daniel shook his head. It's Father's Day. The words felt final. Defeating. Painful. Then suddenly the gym doors opened. A tall man stepped inside. Expensive suit. Confident walk. Powerful presence. The children barely noticed. But several teachers did. Parents did. And one little boy named Damien looked up, then froze because he recognized him immediately. The investment man. Daniel blinked. What? Damien pointed dramatically. The investment man. At the far end of the gym, Anthony Green stood speaking to the principal. Invited as a major donor and guest sponsor. Completely unaware that 3 pairs of eyes were suddenly staring at him. Completely unaware that his children were only a few feet away. And fate was getting tired of waiting. That's him. Damien pointed so enthusiastically that Daisy immediately grabbed his arm. Pointing is rude. But that's him. Who? The investment man. Daisy blinked. The what? Before she could ask another question, Damien had already started moving. Fast. Very fast. Too fast. Damien. The little boy ignored her completely. Naturally. Daisy immediately started after him. Daniel sighed. Diana followed. The teacher looked alarmed. And somewhere across the gymnasium, Anthony Green was having a perfectly normal conversation. For about 5 more seconds. And we'd like to thank Green Holdings for its continued support. Anthony nodded politely. The principal continued speaking. Something about future programs. Something about scholarships. Something about expansion. Anthony wasn't really listening. Years of corporate meetings had taught him how to look attentive while mentally being somewhere else. Then a familiar voice interrupted. Investment men. Anthony froze. Not again. He looked down and immediately recognized the tiny troublemaker. Damien Hart. The little businessman. The future financial menace. Anthony found himself smiling before he could stop it. Damien. The boy looked pleased. Very pleased. You remembered. I remember people who try to sell me things. The principal looked confused. The teachers looked confused. Several parents looked confused. Damien looked proud. As though this was a compliment. Which, unfortunately, it probably was. By the time Daisy arrived, Damien was already talking. A lot. And then the principal said I couldn't charge playground fees. Anthony laughed. Actually laughed. Again. Daisy couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a stranger take such an immediate liking to Damien. Most people needed time. Several years, usually. Damien. The little boy finally looked guilty. Slightly. Sorry, Mom. Not sorry. At all. Anthony noticed immediately. The corner of his mouth twitched. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Because Damien had apparently found another adult willing to encourage his nonsense. Mr. Green. Daisy extended her hand politely. Anthony accepted it. The moment their hands touched, something strange happened. Nothing dramatic. Nothing magical. Just a brief sense of familiarity. As though they had crossed paths before. Somewhere. Somehow. Both dismissed the feeling immediately. Neither had time to think about it. Because Damien was still talking. Nearby, Daniel watched quietly. Observing. Studying. Analyzing. Something Daisy often forgot was that Daniel noticed everything. Everything. The little boy looked from Anthony to Damien, then back to Anthony, and frowned. His expression became thoughtful. Very thoughtful. The kind of thoughtful that usually preceded difficult questions. Daisy immediately became nervous because Daniel's questions were dangerous. Unlike Damien, who spoke first and thought later, Daniel thought first. A lot. Then asked things nobody wanted to answer. Meanwhile, Diana stood beside Anthony, completely comfortable. Which was unusual. Normally she was shy around strangers. Today she wasn't. The little girl looked up, studying him, then smiled. A sweet, gentle, heart-melting smile. Anthony felt something shift inside him. Again. That strange warmth. The one he'd experienced during the charity event. Only stronger this time. Much stronger. Hi. Diana's voice was soft. Anthony smiled. Hi. The little girl held up a handmade Father's Day card. Anthony glanced at it. Then froze. The colorful paper showed a smiling stick figure family. A mother. 3 children. And an empty space. A blank space where another figure should have been. His chest tightened unexpectedly. "Did you make that?" Diana nodded. Everyone else made one too. The sadness in her voice was subtle. But it was there. Anthony felt it immediately. The emotion hit harder than it should have. Far harder. Because for some reason, he hated seeing disappointment in her eyes. Across the gym, the event finally began. Parents took their seats. Children gathered nearby. Laughter filled the room. Excitement spread everywhere. Everywhere except one corner. Where 3 little siblings sat quietly. Watching. Waiting. Trying not to feel different. Anthony noticed. He couldn't help noticing. The triplets smiled. They participated. They laughed. But something felt missing. Something obvious. Something painful. Then he remembered. Father's Day. Understanding settled heavily inside his chest. And suddenly the empty chair beside the triplets seemed impossible to ignore. The principal stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, ready to begin. Anthony should have been paying attention. Instead, his gaze drifted back toward the children. Toward Daniel. Toward Diana. Toward Damien. Toward the empty chair beside them. A chair that should have belonged to someone. A chair that, for reasons he couldn't explain, made his chest ache. And for the first time in many years, Anthony Green found himself wishing he could do something about it. The first activity began. Children and fathers were asked to form teams. The empty chair. Excitement exploded throughout the gymnasium. The triplets remained seated. Daniel looked down. Diana smiled bravely. Damien crossed his arms. The little boy looked angry. Not sad. Angry. A very Damien reaction. The teacher approached, clearly uncomfortable. Daisy. Daisy looked up. The woman lowered her voice. They don't have to participate. The statement hurt. Not because the teacher meant any harm. Because the children heard it. Every word. Every single word. And the disappointment in their eyes was impossible to miss. At that exact moment, Anthony stood. Without thinking. Without planning. Without consulting the logical part of his brain. He simply stood. His grandfather immediately noticed. A slow smile spread across the old man's face because he already knew. Anthony, unfortunately, did not. He only knew one thing. Those children looked like they were hurting. And for some reason, he couldn't bear it. The teacher looked surprised when Anthony approached. "Mr. Green." Anthony glanced at the triplets, then at the teacher, then back at the triplets. The words came out before he could stop them. "Would it be all right if I helped?" Silence. Complete silence. Several parents turned. The principal froze. Daisy blinked. The teacher stared. Even Anthony was slightly shocked by what he'd just said. Because honestly, what was he doing? Damien recovered first. Immediately. See. Nobody knew what that meant, including Daisy. But Damien looked victorious, which was never a good sign. "You said he was important." The boy pointed dramatically. "Now he's volunteering." Daniel looked embarrassed. Diana looked hopeful. Anthony looked confused. Daisy looked exhausted. Normal Damien behavior. The teacher eventually smiled. "I think that would be wonderful." Anthony should have walked away. Politely. Respectfully. Instead he sat down beside the triplets. Right beside the empty chair. The chair nobody had occupied all day. The chair that suddenly didn't seem quite so empty anymore. The first challenge involved building a tower. Simple. Or at least it should have been. Unfortunately, Damien existed. No, Anthony removed 3 blocks. Damien looked offended. Why? Because that's not a tower. It will be. It won't. It might. Anthony stared. The little boy stared back. A battle of stubbornness immediately began. Several minutes later Daniel sighed. Again. The sigh of a child burdened by excessive intelligence. You're both wrong. Anthony blinked. Excuse me. Daniel calmly adjusted the structure. Within seconds the tower stood perfectly balanced. The adults around them applauded. Anthony stared. Impressed. Very impressed. The kid was smart. Dangerously smart. Then there was Diana. The peacekeeper. The diplomat. The heart of the group. Whenever Daniel and Damien argued, she intervened. Whenever someone looked sad, she comforted them. Whenever Anthony struggled to understand what was happening, she explained. Patiently. Kindly. As though she had been doing it for years. Anthony found himself smiling repeatedly. The children were impossible not to love. The realization startled him. Because he had known them for approximately 40 minutes. Across the gym, Daisy watched quietly. Something strange was happening. The children looked comfortable. Natural. Happy. As though Anthony had always been there. And somehow, Anthony looked different too. Lighter. Warmer. More relaxed than she had ever seen him. Even his smile seemed genuine. Not forced. Not polite. Real. The sight made something twist inside her chest. A strange mixture of gratitude and sadness. Because for the first time, she could clearly see what her children had been missing. And what Anthony himself seemed to be missing too. The event ended hours later. Children gathered their belongings. Parents exchanged goodbyes. People slowly began leaving. The triplets stood beside Anthony. None of them seemed eager to say goodbye. Especially Diana. The little girl hesitated. Then held out her Father's Day card. The unfinished one. The one with the empty space. Anthony looked down. Confused. Diana smiled shyly. You can keep it. The gym suddenly felt very quiet. Anthony carefully accepted the card. His throat tightened unexpectedly. Thank you. The little girl hugged him. Without hesitation. Without permission. Without warning. Anthony froze. Completely. For one brief moment, the world seemed to stop. Then he slowly hugged her back. And something inside him cracked. Not painfully. Not completely. Just enough to let a little light through. Enough to make him realize how empty his life had truly been. Enough to make saying goodbye much harder than it should have been. As Daisy led the triplets toward the exit, Damien suddenly turned around. Investment men. Anthony smiled. Yes. The little boy grinned. See you again. Anthony's smile widened. For reasons he couldn't explain. I hope so. And somewhere deep inside, fate smiled too. Because for the first time, Anthony Green had spent a day acting like a father. Without realizing the children he cared about were already his. The card. Anthony should have thrown it away. That was the logical thing to do, the reasonable thing, the normal thing. Yet 3 days later, Diana's Father's Day card still sat on his desk, right beside several billion-dollar contracts. The contrast was absurd. One document represented millions. The other was construction paper covered in glitter. Guess which one held his attention? You've been staring at that card for 10 minutes. Anthony looked up. His assistant stood in the doorway. Again. Always appearing at the worst possible moments. I haven't. You have, I was thinking. About the card. Anthony sighed. The woman was annoyingly observant. His assistant approached, carefully inspecting the colorful paper. A smiling stick figure family. A mother. 3 children. An empty space. The empty space bothered him. Far more than it should. You like them? Anthony immediately frowned. They're children. That's not a denial. The assistant smiled. Dangerous. Very dangerous. Anthony ignored her. Unfortunately, his silence was answer enough. Across town, Daniel Hart was conducting an investigation. A serious one. At least by 5-year-old standards. His notebook sat open on the living room floor. Several pages contained observations. Facts. Questions. Evidence. Daisy stared. Concerned. What are you doing? Daniel didn't look up. Research. Never a good answer. What kind of research? The little boy pointed toward the page. Daisy leaned closer, immediately regretting it because the title read, The Investment Man. Oh no. Not this. Not at all. Daniel. He finally looked up. What? Daisy chose her next words carefully. Very carefully. Why are you investigating Mr. Green? Daniel blinked, then shrugged. Asking questions is important. That sounded suspiciously reasonable. Daisy hated it. What kind of questions? The little boy considered this, then answered honestly. The normal kind. Which meant absolutely nothing. Later that evening, the triplets sat around the dining table. Homework spread everywhere. Crayons. Pencils. Books. Chaos. Normal family life. Or as close as they could manage. Damien suddenly looked up. Mom. Daisy immediately became suspicious. Experience had taught her this. Yes. When are we seeing the investment man again? There it was. The obsession continued. Daisy sighed. I don't know. Damien looked disappointed. He likes me. Daniel snorted. The sound shocked everyone, including Daniel. Apparently even he had limits. He likes all of us. Damien folded his arms. Mostly me. No, yes. No, yes. The argument escalated immediately. Diana rolled her eyes. A surprisingly sophisticated reaction for a 5-year-old. Then she quietly asked, Do you think he was lonely? The room fell silent. Daisy blinked. What? Diana looked down. Thoughtful, he looked sad sometimes. The statement hit harder than expected because Daisy had noticed it too. The smiles. The kindness. The warmth. But underneath all of it, something hurt. She had seen it in his eyes. The kind of loneliness that couldn't be hidden completely. The kind people carried for years. The realization unsettled her because she understood loneliness better than most. That same night, Anthony stood on the balcony of his penthouse. The city stretched endlessly below. Lights. Traffic. Life. Yet all he could think about were 3 children. Particularly one stubborn little boy. One thoughtful little boy. And one sweet little girl. The realization was ridiculous. He barely knew them. Yet somehow the penthouse felt even emptier than usual. His phone buzzed. A message from his grandfather. Dinner tomorrow. Don't make excuses. Anthony smiled despite himself. The old man was relentless. Then another message arrived. This one from an unknown number. The smile disappeared. Immediately Anthony opened it. The message contained only one sentence. If you want the truth about your medical records, stop ignoring the signs. His entire body went still. The city lights blurred. His pulse accelerated. For several seconds he simply stared, reading the message again and again. The words made no sense. Yet somehow they terrified him because deep down, a part of him had always wondered. Always questioned. Always doubted what if. What if the diagnosis was wrong? What if something had been missed? What if 15 years of his life had been built on a lie? Anthony looked out at the city. His heart beat loud in his ears. Because for the first time, someone else was asking the same questions. And somewhere nearby, Martha N. George was discovering that the email she had sent weeks earlier had finally reached the right person. The DNA bomb arc was getting closer. And the first crack in the conspiracy had just appeared. Anthony didn't sleep. Not after the message. Not after reading those words. Not after spending 3 hours staring at his phone like it contained the answers to every question he'd carried for 15 years. If you want the truth about your medical records, stop ignoring the signs. The message haunted him because it touched a wound he never discussed. A wound he barely allowed himself to think about. The diagnosis. The verdict. The sentence that had shaped his entire life. Sterile. The word echoed through his mind again and again until dawn finally arrived. By 8 o'clock the following morning, Anthony was sitting in his office. The message displayed on his computer screen. His assistant stood nearby. Concerned. "You look terrible." Anthony ignored her. "Trace the number." She blinked the message. "Yes." Her concern deepened. "What happened?" Anthony hesitated, then handed over the phone. The moment she read the text, her expression changed immediately. "What does this mean?" "I don't know." Which was true. And terrifying. Because for years Anthony had accepted the diagnosis. Eventually, grief became routine. Routine became reality. Reality became his life. Now someone was suggesting that reality might be wrong. The possibility frightened him more than he wanted to admit. Across town, Daisy was having a much different morning. Specifically, she was chasing Damien. Again. "Get down from there." No, the little boy sat happily atop a bookshelf, eating cookies like a tiny criminal. Daisy pinched the bridge of her nose. "Why are you on the bookshelf?" Damien shrugged. "Perspective." "Perspective?" "Yes." Daniel sighed. The now famous Daniel sigh. The sigh of a child constantly disappointed by humanity. "He means he wanted to see farther." Daisy looked at her eldest son. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Then Daniel returned to reading as if translating Damien's nonsense was a normal daily responsibility. Which, unfortunately, it was. Later that afternoon, Daniel approached Daisy carrying his notebook. The notebook, the dangerous notebook. Daisy immediately became nervous. "Mom." "Yes." Daniel climbed onto the couch beside her. His expression serious. Too serious. "Can I ask a question?" That sentence had never led anywhere good. Not once. Daisy braced herself. "Okay." Daniel opened the notebook. Several pages contained observations about Anthony Green. Drawings. Notes. Comments. Research. Far too much research. Daisy stared. Horrified. "When did you do all this?" The little boy looked confused. "During the week." "Of course. Naturally. Why play video games when you could conduct investigations, Daniel?" "Yes." Daisy carefully chose her words. "Why are you so interested in Mr. Green?" The little boy was silent for a moment. Then he answered. And the answer stole her breath. "Because he looks like Damien." The room went completely silent. Daisy froze. Daniel continued, oblivious. The eyes. Her heart skipped. The smile. Another beat. The stubbornness. A third. And they're both good at business. Daisy stared at him, speechless. Because for one terrifying second, the thought crossed her mind. Then she immediately pushed it away. Impossible. Completely impossible. Thousands of people shared similar features. Millions. The world wasn't that small. Still, the observation lingered. Uncomfortable. Persistent. Dangerous. That same evening, Martha N. George parked outside Green Holdings headquarters. Her hands trembled against the steering wheel. For weeks she had hidden. Waited. Watched. Gathered evidence. Now she had finally made a decision. No more anonymous messages. No more warnings. No more hints. Anthony Green deserved the truth. All of it. The folder sitting beside her contained everything. The altered records. The hidden reports. The suspicious access logs. The fertility evaluation. Years of deception. Years of lies. Years stolen. Martha stared at the building. Then took a deep breath. And stepped out of the car. Inside Green Holdings, Anthony stood near the window, lost in thought. The city stretched endlessly below. Yet his attention remained fixed on one question. What if? What if the diagnosis was wrong? What if the message was real? What if his entire life had been built on a lie? A knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in. The door opened. His assistant appeared, looking unusually pale. Anthony frowned. What is it? She swallowed. Then answered. There's a woman downstairs asking to see you. Anthony sighed. I have meetings. She says it's urgent. Everyone says that. The assistant hesitated. Then added, she said it's about your infertility. The room instantly went silent. Every muscle in Anthony's body locked. His heartbeat accelerated. The city vanished. The office vanished. Everything vanished. Except those words. About your infertility. Slowly, very slowly. Anthony looked up. For the first time in 15 years, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. Because deep down, he already knew. His life was about to change forever. The truth begins: Anthony Green had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions. He had faced hostile takeovers. Survived boardroom wars. Buried competitors. Built an empire. Yet somehow, the woman sitting across from him made him more nervous than any of those things. Martha and George looked exhausted. Terrified. And completely serious, which immediately concerned him. His assistant had escorted her into a private conference room. Now only the two of them remained. A thick folder sat on the table between them. Anthony's eyes never left it. You said this is about my infertility. Martha nodded. Yes. Silence followed. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then Anthony asked the question that had haunted him all morning. Who are you? I'm a laboratory technician. His frown deepened. A technician. At the fertility clinic. The words instantly captured his attention. Every instinct sharpened. Every sense heightened. Because suddenly the anonymous message made sense. At least partially. What exactly is this about? Martha looked down at the folder. Then back at him, as though deciding how much to reveal. How quickly. How carefully finally she spoke. What I'm about to tell you may be difficult to hear. Anthony almost laughed. His entire life had been difficult to hear. He doubted this could be worse. He was wrong. Martha slowly opened the folder. Several documents slid across the table. Anthony immediately recognized some of them. Medical reports. Hospital records. Fertility assessments. Pieces of a life he had spent years trying to forget. These belong to you. Anthony nodded. I know. What you don't know is that some of them shouldn't exist. The room fell silent. His stomach tightened. What do you mean? Martha handed him another document. An older one. Much older. The paper appeared worn. Archived. Forgotten. Anthony scanned the contents. Then froze. His eyes moved over the page again. And again. And again. The words remained exactly the same. Normal fertility markers. His pulse accelerated. No. That couldn't be right. His gaze jumped to the date. 14 years ago. 1 year before the first diagnosis. 1 year before everything changed. Anthony looked up slowly. What is this? Martha swallowed. The first complete fertility assessment we found. Found. The wording unsettled him. What do you mean found? Her expression darkened. Someone tried very hard to make sure nobody ever saw it. The room became painfully quiet. Anthony stared at her. Unable to speak. Unable to think. Unable to breathe properly. Because for the first time, the impossible seemed possible. No, the word escaped automatically. Martha remained silent. Anthony pushed the document away. No, his voice became harder. This has to be a mistake. I thought so too. No, Martha waited. Patiently. Carefully. I checked the records multiple times. Anthony stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor. The sound echoed through the room. His heart hammered violently. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Every doctor, every hospital, every specialist, every test. They couldn't all be wrong. Could they? The question terrified him. Because deep down, a tiny voice whispered something dangerous. What if they weren't wrong? What if they were lying? Martha slid another document across the table. Then another. Then another. Each one more disturbing than the last. Access logs. Archived reports. Deleted records. Unauthorized modifications. Evidence. Pages and pages of evidence. Anthony's hands trembled as he reviewed them because a pattern was beginning to emerge. A very ugly pattern. The same facilities. The same names. The same physicians. Repeatedly. Over years. Over many years. His stomach twisted. This doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me either. Martha's voice softened. Until I realized somebody was changing your records. Anthony looked up sharply. The words hit like a physical blow. Changing your records. Not misplacing them. Not misunderstanding them. Changing them. Deliberately. Intentionally. Purposefully. No, his voice cracked. For the first time in years, it actually cracked. Martha looked away briefly, as though giving him privacy. Dignity. Time. Because she understood what he was losing. Or perhaps what he was realizing he had already lost. 15 years. The number echoed through Anthony's mind. 15 years. 15 birthdays. 15 Christmases. 15 years of believing he'd never have children. 15 years of broken relationships. Of loneliness. Of grief. Of acceptance. Of surrender. And now. Someone was suggesting it had all been a lie. His chest tightened painfully. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Martha looked at him. Genuine sadness filling her eyes. I don't know. Anthony laughed bitterly. Not because anything was funny. Because he suddenly wanted to break something. Anything. Everything. Someone had stolen years from him. Years he could never recover. Years he could never relive. Years he could never replace. The realization hurt more than the diagnosis ever had. Then Martha reached into the folder one final time. Her hands shook. For the first time since entering the room. Anthony noticed. Whatever she was about to reveal frightened even her. Slowly, carefully, she placed a single page in front of him. Anthony frowned. What is this? Martha's voice dropped. Almost to a whisper. The reason I started investigating. Anthony looked down. The document contained clinic records. Transfer logs. Donor information. Patient information. At first, nothing stood out. Then he saw his name. Anthony Green. His entire body went still. His heartbeat stopped. Or at least it felt that way. Because beneath his name was another. A woman. A woman he had never met. A woman he had seen only twice. A woman accompanied by 3 children. 3 children he couldn't stop thinking about. 3 children who somehow felt familiar. His eyes widened. Slowly. Dangerously. As he read the name. Daisy Hart. The room spun. The page trembled in his hands. And for the first time, Anthony Green realized the truth might be far bigger than he had ever imagined.